Tom. All right, that's a Schofield style blues from that Butternote Music channel I've been liking a lot. How's everyone going? As you come in, please say hey, as Mr. Tom has already done. We're going to talk about pentatonic scales today. I'm going to give it a few more minutes. I'm probably going to just jam on something else. It's always fun. Soulful Seductive Groove backing track. Let's try this one.
We're calling these
I love the names that people give these things.
Panels. They're a new generation of super powerful
Can we
solar
skip
panels.
that? There we go. That kind of sucked. I'm just kind of grabbing stuff at random. You guys hear everything okay? Hey, Mark. All right. Enough of that. I'm playing through my, I've been kind of working up my pedal board. This is going to be kind of like the sidebar conversation for the next few things here. Let me give you guys a little view of what's going on down here. So I just recently, if you were here on Wednesday, you guys saw that I was talking about putting this all back together. Kind of like me doing like a rain dance for gigs, putting positive energy out there. But a good friend of mine helped build some wire and cable for me, so I'm actually have all, for the first time in probably 2 decades, I'm not using George L cables. And I got a pretty wide array of overdrives, and I'm starting to program sounds, and it's kind of fun, actually. You know, it's one of those deals where you know, I've been using that kind of torn apart for my recording and whatnot, and having it all kind of back in one place where I can actually start, you know, playing with some sounds. It's kind of nice. I've got a lot of like I haven't had a compressor in a while. That's that Andy Wood Woodshed, the Sur compressor. I'm also not very warmed up. So here's without. Here's with the compressor. And we've gone programming some of the little slap. I'm going to do a full video on this. I'm sitting here, I'm getting kind of distracted. I'm enjoying it greatly though. So let's talk about pentatonic scales. I guess the first thing to do is to define what a pentatonic scale is. So let's crop this sucker here. There we go. And I think to start off our conversation, I like doing this where we're actually distilling or pulling this pentatonic scale out of a major scale. And we're going to do this the easy way. If we were to take our G root pattern here in C. All right, I'm just going to build a major scale over this. All right, if you guys remember from past lessons, we do this with scale degrees, whole step, half step. If you're not familiar with, or this doesn't sound like English to you, what you really want to do is go back after this and the whole series of lessons I described this, plus there's the series of lessons, the pre-recorded, like the videos I've been doing all year. There's a whole system on doing this. This should be pretty easy to understand, but it does help, you know, if you want to go back and reference those things. But for right now, what we're doing is we're just trying to get this kind of in a way that you can see it. Hey, Charles. So I'm just going to build this whole step to 5, whole step to 6, whole step to 7, half step to the root again, whole step to 2, whole step to 3, 4, 5, whole step to 6, 7. There's the root. I'll fill these guys in on this string because it'll be the same thing. Yeah. And this is a major pentatonic, or a major scale, just a regular 7-note major scale in the key of C. So if I was to play just what I've written on the page here, there's got to be a better way. All right, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Hey, Terry. 4, 5, 6, 7, root, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, root. Now, I always tell people, hey, you know what? The easiest thing to do here is to get rid of the 4th and the 7th. All right, so we just go through and like all of these 4s, all these 7s go bye-bye. All right, and if we just take what we have there, and we'll bring it down here, what's left over is your major pentatonic scale. And you're going to see that no matter what other scales or modes we play, typically the framework of this pentatonic scale is lurking within it. So this is major C major pentatonic. Right? So instead of all 7 notes, we're playing root, 2, 3, 4. I'm sorry, root, 2, 3, 5, 6, root, 2, 3, 5, 6, root. All right, and it's one of the first scale patterns, one of the first box patterns that we typically learn as guitar players. It's easy. It's where a lot of our favorite early solos are that we learn. It's easy to play blues in it. Right. That shape is also the minor pentatonic. So this is the major. If we want to take, you know, let me notate this here for a second. So this is C major. In that position, this is C major pentatonic. Now, if we come down here and we do this as the relative minor, so remember that every major key also shares the same notes with a minor key. And just for the sake of doing this, I'm going to tell you it in the key of C, it's A, right? So we start on the 6th note. Like if I was to go through this and circle all of the 6s, right? That gives us an E root pattern, and that's the root or the relative minor. If we go through though and we do all of this relative to those roots, you're going to get the same notes as we have in the major scale, but they're going to have different names. Root 2, half step to minor 3, because the half steps are between 2 and 3 and 5 and 6 in this scale. 4, 5, minor 6, because the 6 gets lowered, minor 7. We've covered all this in previous lessons, so I'm not going to discuss it too much, but I do want you to see me go through this process for a second. 3, 4, 5, minor 6, minor 7, root 2, minor 3. Yes, this is A minor, also known as Aeolian, like we discussed actually last week or on Wednesday in the modes lesson. Now, if we were to separate two notes from this natural minor scale, which will end up being the 2s and the minor 6s, we're going to get A minor pentatonic. I know these things are kind of scribbles. Do you guys like it when I post these as PDFs after the lesson? Let me know, and I can do that. I don't always think about it. Sometimes we've got PDFs from previous lessons that work, but sometimes having my actual notes is nicer. Okay, so with that, say I've got a C major scale. Oops, actually, let me do something real quick and I'll kind of demonstrate these sounds. Might be easier to do it this way. Man, I watch a lot of YouTube. Hang on a second, guys. I'll be right with you. This would have been easier just doing it this way, I guess. All right, and like last time, I think I've got these already posted in the video description. So here's C major. Can you guys hear this? Let me turn it up a little bit. Usually this isn't loud enough. All right, so if I go through this major scale, obviously all those notes work. All right, root 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's one sound. But if I just take the notes that are in the pentatonic scale here, root 2, 3, 5, 6, it's a little bit more of an open sound. Pentatonic scales are great because since you have so many chord tones, or such a high percentage of these notes as chord tones, right? 3 out of the 5, you know, it's easy to kind of define the sound. But just like with the other lessons, when we talk about resolution points and how to shape melodies, you got to be aware that within this root 3, 5, root 3, 5, root, those notes are kind of the points that you want to sit on, and the notes that are interesting are the 6th and the 2. And that interest says, hey, I want to go up to the 3, or I want to go down to the root. And same thing here. The 6 kind of wants to go down to the 5, although it doesn't mind going up to the root. That's like a big BB King. Right? That 2 likes to be bent up to the 3rd. That note doesn't want to resolve, right? And this gets us to the thing. If I was to treat this like the A minor pentatonic, same physical shape, but this is our root. Our licks that we play are going to aim towards the notes of that arpeggio. So it's going to be A minor, root, minor 3, 5, root, minor 3, 5, root, minor 3. And some of those notes, like the 3, will work, but it's not going to resolve very... Alright? Alright, and that's why, like, when people say, oh, it's in C major, I'll just play A minor over it. That doesn't work, because the problem is that your ear hears where it wants the line or the phrase to end. And if you play a minor lick, right, that doesn't feel finished. It doesn't feel resolved. So, there you go. Right? Even though it's all the notes in the same scale, it doesn't sound good. It doesn't sound good because it doesn't take into consideration the chord you're playing over. Whereas, right, I'm really paying attention to the C major arpeggio within this. And using that as a way of creating lines that make sense, that actually have some resolution. Alright. Let's stop this just for a second. So much of being able to utilize these tools is understanding the context that you're playing at them over, and really just making sure that you know what these notes are against the chord you're playing over. You know, if you just play licks and you're lucky enough to have a good ear, chances are you'll be okay. And a lot of people have gone through life like that. If you're me, and probably a lot of you guys, it really helps to define what these notes are and what their relationships are to each other and to what you're playing over, because then it becomes a lot easier to use this information. And that's kind of been the key guiding principle throughout all these lessons I've done, is that if we can just make sure we know what these things are, we can use them, and we can abuse them. We can do them in a lot of ways. You guys have any questions? I'm gonna take a little coffee break. All right. I'm gonna try something this week and see. If you guys like the videos, please subscribe to the channel. I do these twice a week. If you like this particular video, please hit the thumbs up button and hit the notification bell. That helps too. I'm trying to build something new, so it does not hurt if you guys support, because it makes it easier for me to do this in the future. Okay, anybody have any questions about what I just talked about? All right, so basically we just talked about C major pentatonic and why we need to actually treat C major pentatonic as a separate sound. All right, it's not just a physical pattern on the fretboard. All right, and that's the part that it took me forever to learn, because no one ever taught me that. When I started playing guitar in 1985, you know, everything was like, here's a fretboard pattern, you know, and you're gonna learn that pattern, and then you're gonna learn these licks. You know, it's funny because my stepmom was a trumpet player in the 50s in New York, and she kind of wanted to be a professional trumpet player, and she was a pretty good sight reader, I guess, and she could play decently, but she couldn't improvise. And at that point in time, I guess, not only because she was a girl, but they treated improvisation and music theory almost like voodoo. You know, you could play really good, like you're a lead trumpet player, so technically you had the skills, which is what my mom had, or you could improvise and you knew the theory. And this stuff wasn't really codified and taught in schools at this point for jazz, or for really any style of music. Um, but the people that could improvise, at least around where we were at, um, they kind of guarded that like that was their power, right? And they wouldn't share that information with people because they'd be afraid that the person with the really good chops and the high notes and the all the other stuff, once they actually understood this little bit of knowledge that they had, they take away the improviser seat too. So she never really learned how to improvise beyond ornamenting a melody. And it's weird because even though we've got like, it's funny. This is one of the textbooks that I had when I went back to college. And we talk about like this is a Corelli concerto. I would have to like sit and analyze this stuff, and you learn a whole whack of information, and it's useless to you, except for that specific application. But it's good to know generally. I know all my scales. I knew all my arpeggios. I knew chord construction and harmony. But then you go to a gig and someone says, "Hey, play this calypso song," and it's like, oh, that little bit of information that's relevant to actually making this successful, I never learned in music school, right? Or the opposite. You've got your gig, you play a blues gig or you play a rock gig, and you're really good at that, but you don't have this other knowledge that's a little bit more comprehensive in general that helps you tie that all together. So that way, when you go to your blues gig and someone says, "Hey, we're going to play this other style thing, we're going to play this R&B tune, or we need to transpose this into another key," you're not able to manipulate the music that way. And my aesthetic with this stuff is really that we should kind of learn a combination of skill sets. And part of it is that we want to understand the theory in a practical sense. The majority of you guys watching this video, you're not 19 years old in music school and wanting to have a career in guitar, right? So there are limitations to what you really need and what you really want to spend your time on. You definitely want to play music, So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to provide the skills in a way that's actually useful to you. And some of that is basically writing this stuff out on here and discussing the theory without getting into having you guys learn how to read music and write stuff out on a grand staff and talk about registers and all the other stuff that you do in music school. But we've distilled what's important for my general music education into what is useful and practical and a good general base of information for guitar players, because we play a stylistic instrument. When I go and play a cover gig, I'm not going like, if I was an orchestra player, I would have to have knowledge about classical music, and it would span, probably 400 or 500 years worth of literature, and I'd have to understand Baroque music and classical and Romantic and 20th century, and to a certain extent, but it's all mostly played with the same techniques on an instrument. Whereas on guitar, how I play rockabilly is different than how I play reggae, which is different than how you play, the different genres of metal, the different kinds of blues, the different kinds of funk and soul, So if you're able to break this stuff down into the general components, then it's very easy to look at what you know, listen to what you need to know, and make adjustments. All right, and that's kind of what we do when we're out in the world. So kind of keep that in mind. Hey, David Morris from China. Good to talk to you. Do you guys have any questions at this point? Right. So basically, what I did was we just took your major and minor scales, and we've pulled those notes out that leave us with the pentatonic versions of those scales. Now you can do that with all 5 of the caged root patterns, and I don't want to waste your time doing that here. You guys have seen me build a ton of scales, but any place that you can play a major scale, if I could play C major here, right, then I can also play C major pentatonic by removing those same notes. All right, and my suggestion is always write this stuff out on the paper. There's a link to the PDF, should be underneath this video. May not show while we're doing this live, but after this is finished and the video's finished processing, all of these links should show up in the video description. But you print that out just like I do on the iPad here, and you write the stuff out and you organize it, right? So I know, okay, here's C major here on my guitar. All right, and then within that, I've got C major pentatonic. All right, and I also know it's here. And I know it's here. Whoops, I skipped one. Hey, Robert from Cambridge, Massachusetts. This is fun, actually. This is kind of a fun way to spend my morning. We're spanning the globe. But anyway, so that's the thing, is from one bit of information that you know, that major scale, now we've got two, major scale and major pentatonic. And then also in the major scale lessons, we also talked about how to pull your major triad shape out of that by using the first, third, and fifth notes. Let me tune real quick. Or whether it's nowhere what it is in the rest of the country here. I'm in Southern California. But it's a little colder out here than it is in the house, and my guitar doesn't enjoy that so much. All right, so we could always break this down. Major scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Oh, dang, it's 1 a.m. in China. And then the triad, root 3, 5, root 3, 5. All right, and now we've got the pentatonic scale, which is root 2, 3, 5, 6, and so on. Right? If you've been kind of following the bouncing ball with this stuff, then you know that if you've done the process through all of these live streams and the other videos, you learn the caged root patterns, right? Which are basically the roots that we've pulled out of each of the open major chords that we know in the open position. And then we talked about how we can build major scales around that using half steps and whole steps in each of the caged patterns. Right? And then at the end of that lesson, we talked about, basically if you take your root 3 and 5 out of those scale patterns and get rid of the rest of the notes, you've got a major triad, which makes up a major chord. And that's kind of the parent chord for that key. All right? Kind of a general recap here. The next thing we talked about is that you can take those triads, and if you manipulate the notes within it, you get other chords. The first one is if you take the third, you lower it a half step, and we're calling that a minor third without getting into the theory. That makes a minor chord, so root, minor third, 5, root, minor third, 5. Right, so with that shape, now you've got a minor arpeggio. You can do a diminished, root, minor third, flat, 5. Oops. I'm in the right key. I'm in the wrong key. Root, minor 3, 5. Root, minor 3, 5. All right. You can also do augmented. Root, major 3, sharp 5. Root, major 3, sharp 5. All right. We talked about building other modes around those patterns. So besides the major scale, we talked about lowering the 7th and getting the Mixolydian. Can raise the 4th and keep the 7th as a, so that gives us Lydian. That Lydian, we can make it a minor scale by lowering the 3, 6, and 7. Right, we can just lower the 3 and the 7, make it Dorian. Right, we can lower the root, 3, 6, and 7, make it Phrygian. All right, we can also lower pretty much everything and make it Locrian. Whoops, I did that wrong. Right, right. But the idea is that up to this point, we've been kind of building this knowledge. And I've covered this in less than 3 weeks. And this is not 3 weeks worth of actual work. So you want to keep in mind that as we're working on this, it usually takes a few weeks to really ingest this stuff and know it. And then it also takes not only practicing it, but trying to apply it, you know, playing it over backing tracks, playing other people's music and finding those sounds, building chord shapes out of this. I've kind of found, in my experience, nothing ever gets useful until you've had to actually play it in a piece of music in front of another person. There's this kind of like crystallizing effect that happens, a metamorphosis of whatever the skill is, like the panic or the adrenaline, or just the fact that you know you had to put it together well enough so you don't embarrass yourself in front of another person, right? And if you're not in a position to play in front of other people, even just make a video or make a recording at home, but utilizing this stuff is 90% of the battle. I think you can learn anything, and it just rots under your fingers. And I never really knew that when I was really, I was in college the first time. I learned a lot of stuff, and I go to a gig and then not be able to use any of it. I was just playing the same old crap night after night, not really realizing that, hey, I should learn something and then I should use it in a piece of music that I prepare ahead of time, and get more time under my fingers, Okay, I'm going to stop just for questions real quick. That was kind of a recap, more of a recap than it was a new information. But it's kind of nice to sum up what we've talked about to this point and why we've done it this way. And then after that, I'm going to move on to the next scale patterns that are useful. So, one of the things that we did not do, let's do this way. Maybe we can do this where we don't crop it. Oh. Makes this no better than if we do this. All right. So I'm going to come back here to G, so this all fits here. And we never did 3-note per string patterns. Right? So if we were to build a major scale 3 notes per string, and I'll just kind of crank through this, you're going to discover that instead of this caged pattern, which is almost like a silo, like you have all of these silos on the fretboard where you can only play up and down, you get something that moves across the fretboard more diagonally. Right? And this helps us break out of the initial patterns that we learn. And the main organizing factor of this idea is just the fact that every string needs to have 3 notes on it. All right. And if I was to, I could say like right here, here, and here, this is the E root pattern from caged. And then, oops, do this in purple. If I take this guy and this guy, those are the D root patterns. So instead of only playing G here and G here, right now we have this this composite pattern that does both of them. Root 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Root 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Root 2, 3, 4. And the nice thing about being able to play this way is that most of my more, we'll say musical phrases, the stuff that I play, right, it works on a diagonal more than anything else. So I put this guy on, let's get the G major one here. It's much easier to play musically for me if I'm thinking on that diagonal than if I'm like, here is G. Right? Yeah, you can. I mean, all the notes are there. But for me, it's so much easier to build phrases. on that diagonal, right? Because you right. The diagonal is really where I spend most of my time. And you're probably saying, hey, you know, if that's so important, why don't we learn that to start with? But the problem is that we need to have a real comprehensive understanding of the fretboard. And there's many ways that you can take in and digest the fretboard as possible, the better. Plus, this also organizes it. We're giving you different methods of organization for this stuff that will help you memorize it. Now, we're actually discussing pentatonic scales. Right, so this is G major. Here's going to be, oops, G major pentatonic. All right, and it's going to be pulled out of that scale pattern. So root 2, 3, 5, 6, root 2. Actually, it's going to be a little bit different. But it's the same idea. And there's a root out here. All right. And part of the reason why we do it this way versus that way is because of the diagonal idea. All right. This actually, if I think that way, I'm almost thinking more like Eric Johnson-y kind of lines, which is cool. But it's not as useful as what we're going to be talking about. So we're gonna have this one extended deal. All right, and you've got this diagonal. Whoops, what did I just do? I got every song here. That's what we wanted. All right, so we've got the diagonal going that way, the diagonal going this way, and you can see, hey, if I've got an idea that goes root 3, 5, or root 2, 3, then I know it here. It's all the same idea, right? So if I go, so betting the 2 up to 3, root 2, 6, root. I can do the same thing right there. So a lick that I know in one place now has a life in other places. A couple weeks ago we were talking about open E stuff, all right? And I was playing Hideaway by Freddie King as an example. Right, so I've got the lick right there, the main lick. And I know, because of what those notes are, I know 5, 6, root 2, 3, 5, 6, root 2, 3. I can play it there. I know I can play it. Oops. Hey, Bruce. Right, but hey, we're not in that key. I know what those notes are relative to E. I just move them up to where it's in G. Oops. And now I've got the ability to take one simple idea and manipulate it all around the fretboard. All right, because I know what that phrase is, and I know what those notes in that phrase are relative to the root using these scale degrees or these numbers, right? And because I've got it laid out where, as I go across the fretboard, it's largely the same physical shape. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, right? That's the same exact thing. It's just down a string and over 2 frets. And then the last one, it's up a fret, down a string. Alright, so anything you play in one of these patterns, if you do that there, you do it there. Gotta make an allowance because I don't have a note on a lower string for that. What goes to the 5 there. All right. Does this make sense in terms of why we look at the fretboard this way? That diagonal is super useful. And if you really watch me play, like even over a blues, you'll see this stuff. So here's the G, the jump blues one from a couple weeks ago. So that lick, which is not the greatest lick in the world, right? Root, 6-5, root. Root, 6-5, root. And the same thing right down there, right? So I played this idea based off of these notes in 3 different octaves. Right. And then you add a couple things, and suddenly you've got these phrases that are much more interesting. And I can extend this to all the other sounds. So that's just me basically just taking that idea, not just the pentatonic scale, but some of the other things that we've talked about, moving them down the fretboard. This one here, that was always my great cheat lick there, right? Just pull-offs, 6-5 root, right? I'm sorry, 6th fret, 5th fret, 3rd fret, which is the minor 3rd, 2nd, and then the root. And I just move it down a string, which becomes minor 7, 6, 5. All right, and then this adds the flat 5, 4, and minor 3rd. So for a blues, right? But what's kind of cool, right, is that I can extend that, play it there and then the octave lower. All right, now I can play all the way through there. If I take it up here. So enough of that. That's kind of a goofy idea, but that gives me that major pentatonic spread across the fretboard, right? And I know that those notes, they work with that lateral movement, right? I can play them in the caged root patterns. But if you notice, when I play these different patterns on the fretboard, I generally tend to play different things, right? Right, you've heard that a bunch. If I play that scale, right, if I play that scale in this pattern, it's a little bit more sequential, almost Eric Johnson-y, as much as I can. All right, having these different approaches to the same scales, it gives me some options, and it gives me some ways of giving different life to the same 5 notes. Because that's the hard part. When you get a scale sound, or you get anything, if you just use it one way, that's how you're going to play it, right? But if you have a way of like picking up and turning around and looking at it from a different angle, all of a sudden at that point, you've got all kinds of options that you can use over something like this, right? And even if I'm playing over, let's just find some G major, say G major pop backing track. This is one of the best things too in the YouTube era, is just find something that at random that's in the key that you want to play in, and make what you're playing fit over that style. So I have no idea what this is. I literally just. So that's one way of looking at it. Let's just take what the next track is down the playlist. This one says pop rock in G major. This one's got like 2,000 thumbs ups on it, so maybe people like this one. Let's see what this one does. Oops. Maybe a different sound. That's obnoxious, but you know, hey Steve, the idea here is that you're living kind of in a world or right now where everything is available for you to learn from. You can say, hey, G major licks on YouTube and see what comes up, right? And it may be something you would never play, but because you can actually look at those licks and say, hey, I know what those notes are relative to the root, maybe I can utilize that. In the noodling I just did, I played stuff I've learned from David Gilmour, Eric Johnson, some bluegrassy kind of things, some Hendrixy kind of things, some stuff that like Neil Schon from Journey, and that stuff like I've never really like sat and kind of had to work that stuff out, and well, some of it I did. But the idea is that material is there, and I can take the raw material and synthesize it into something that works for this new setting. And this goes back to when I was saying, hey, it's important to learn the theory, it's important to practice stuff on the fretboard, but it's also important to use it musically, right? And this almost approximates what you do on a gig. Someone just plays something. The rhythm section may play a familiar song in a different way, maybe a song you've never heard of before. But it kind of gets the juices flowing, and it gets you processing and hearing things beyond just what you've learned by rote. So I'm going to pause just for a second. If you guys have any questions, go ahead and shoot them up there. Man, I got to do some G major backing tracks because these are not super inspiring. This is a lead guitar worship one. Happy jamming. All right. great if I need to play a solo on a contemporary Christian song now. But that's what, you know, find something maybe that's got a reggae feel to it, something that's got a bluesy feel, something that's got a funky feel. Use these sounds in a lot of different contexts. They'll actually start your ability to utilize them will broaden quite a bit. Okay, so that's major pentatonic. Let's take the minor version of this. So let's do G minor pentatonic. Oops. G minor and then okay, so if I just lay out the same roots to start with here. All right. Remember, if we do G minor, root 2, minor 3, 4, 5, minor 6, minor 7, root 2. So this is going to look a little different if we just follow the rules. 2, minor 3, and then 4. All right. So this right here, it's great for shredding. Right, and that's one of the reasons why people usually learn 3-note per string scales. It's mathematically it's easier to play fast. Oops. But this doesn't help us very much with what we're going to do. Right, because what I would like to do, I guess the easiest way to do something like this is say, hey, you know what? Let's start here. Because this pattern changes up a little bit. So we've got a root here. And part of this is like, where are these boxes? And my brain just like kind of totally went into brain freeze right here. All right. Okay, so this pattern is actually going to be a little different looking. I'm going to start here on the minor 7. And this is going to give us almost the same kind of finger layout. Minor 7 root, minor 3, 4, 5. Right, so if you remember, we had 3 notes and then 2 for the major. Here we're going to go 2 and then 3. Minor 7 root, minor 3, 4, 5. Minor 7 root, minor 3, 4, 5. Same thing here. Okay. You guys see the diagonal there? So let's pull up just a minor. Go with one of my minors to start with here. So here's G minor. If I do that 3-note per scale, we're gonna talk about that in a second too. We'll give you some like fast ways to, right? But so, right in this box, same as like if we're playing G minor in the regular box pattern, that box is right there. And if you notice, this diagonal that I'm doing here looks a lot like what I was doing earlier in the blues stuff. Let me The other one, what am I thinking? Hey, Rich, no problem. You can catch this on the replay. But then the same idea here: minor 7, root. We're still in G. Minor 3, 4, 5. Right. This one gets a little bit messed up because of the second and third string issue. Minor 7 root. Minor 3, 4, 5. Minor 7 root. Right. Now you've got this this way of tracing across the fretboard. Right. And then you've got your cage patterns. Okay. How are you guys doing on this? All right. What I just did was basically the same thing that we did with the minor pentatonic. We just kind of redefined it so it fit with the major pentatonic. We redefined it to fit the minor pentatonic, though. And we play it over this. So if I was to find a good old minor blues, let me take... This is one of mine, actually. The Funky Soul backing track in E minor. So I'm in E, same idea. Gotta fit the chord there. So there's a lot of chords in that backing track, and I was able to play E minor over the whole thing. But even in that context, hopefully you were seeing how I'm utilizing this information. Hopefully, right? Basically just taking this idea, the 2 and then the 3 in this pentatonic. Right? And I've got a much better path through the fretboard than if I could only play the cage pattern. If I was just to stick to this cage pattern, stop me if this sounds familiar. Right. And for me, like, I kind of start running out of ideas because, like, the physical shape kind of starts pushing me into ways of playing melodies. And I know, like, theoretically, a melody should be the same anywhere you play it. But the way your hand sits on the guitar kind of, to me, it kind of pushes me and inspires me to play things differently. Right. And this is one of the great things about this. What I'm hoping that you're seeing is that all these different approaches give me basically a more expanded vocabulary, a broader palette to play over something that might be really repetitive. The hardest thing is when you just learn a scale pattern. That's the only scale pattern you know, and that's how you look at it. Like if you're playing saxophone, you learn a fingering, and that's what you use, right? And people who play instruments like that, they do a lot of transcribing. They learn a lot of licks, and we should do that too, right? But the thing that makes our instrument sometimes more challenging to learn in the first place, the fact that there's so many different ways of playing the same idea, also gives us a lot of ways to find inspiration in things that are simple, things that are repetitive. So kind of keep that in mind. Okay. Makes sense. Changing the 2-3 pattern because dropping the third. Yeah, I mean physically it just physically it's the same, but the notes are different. So we kind of have to move the things around. All right. So that's largely the idea for pentatonics I want to talk about here. I'm gonna kind of open it up for questions. It could be about anything, it could be about gear, it could be about rhythm guitar. I'm actually doing, I'm working on, and I'm only part of the way through a power chords lesson. And power chords are one of those things that, like, when you're a kid, you just learn a shape, all right, and you play all your tunes, with that shape. But if you really look at the power chords the same way we've been doing all this other stuff, it's the root, it's the 5. A lot of times we'll play the root again. All right, we actually get this way of kind of working through the fretboard. All right, I know that this pattern here, this note starts the next pattern, root, 5, root. All right, I can play a power chord like this out of the C shape, root, 5, root, which is the same as that. And then the one we're really familiar with, which is out of the A cage pattern, root, 5, root. So these notes are the same as those notes. But I would actually play these differently. Like if I needed that there, I'd play it there or here. But if I want to play something that's a little bit more comped or even like a like something along those lines, I might use this sort of thing and use my fingers to play it. Or, basically I'm soloing and I want to actually look at those fifths. Right, I've got that really open sound. All right, and it gives me another way of phrasing my solo lines, as well as just playing as a power chord, right? But I've got this chain. If I start here, and that connects to this one in the same chord, which connects to the, so it's the E shape, the D shape, there's the C shape, A, all right, and then from the A, we can either go to there's the G shape up there, or out of the G shape, the lower octave, right? And this is the same as this chord, which is where we started down there, right? So having this ability to kind of look at a power chord all across the fretboard like that, it gives you not only the ability to play chords in more places, it also gives you kind of a neat thing to talk about when you're soloing over something. So we're in E. So that's basically, that lesson is going to be about like rock rhythm guitar playing, and also using that as kind of a little soloing chop too, and also as a way of looking at your fretboard and expanding the fretboard. In case you haven't noticed, I'm gonna kind of ride this idea like a government mule. We really, if we take something that we're familiar with and we relate everything new that we learn to it, it becomes a lot easier than reinventing the wheel every time you need to learn a new scale pattern. When I first learned this stuff, It was all about new scale patterns. Everything was brand new. I wasted so much time. And if someone had just said, hey, you know what? If you know your minor scale, right, and you want to play a Dorian, just raise the 6. Right, and then the note that's the 6 is actually the Dorian sound. As an example, I would be able to learn the physical pattern quicker, and I would also have something to tie my understanding of what that sound is onto as well. Your overall ability to understand and utilize this stuff becomes a lot stronger when all of this kind of lives in the same ecosystem. And it frustrates me because I never learned this stuff like that. Everything was like, oh, it's Dorian scales time, and then you kind of learn some Dorian stuff, not realizing that those notes are also all these other scales, and anything that you learn in one scale can really be used in another scale. You just want to change the one note that makes it. So if I go, Ozzy? It's like a lick from Goodbye to Romance. Right? I don't know why that just came to mind, but if I want to make, that's a regular minor scale. Right? The Dorian version. Right? There's the natural minor version. The lick now works in both keys. Right? Now I've got vocabulary that I can utilize anywhere. Horrible idea. But if I want to make that major scale sound dominant, if I want to make it minor, make a minor 7 chord. If I want to make it diminished, I can manipulate it because I understand how all this stuff works together. Okay, questions, guys? Also, how's the guitar sound today? On Wednesday, I ran, both you could hear it through the microphone and through my recording interface with the Iridium. And for some reason, and I need to figure this out, the Iridium makes everything kind of over crunchy. I'm trying to, it might just be kind of how it gets taken, and the input level for broadcast might be different than what I'm used to here in the studio. I'm also taking suggestions for future lessons. This is largely going to be the end of this series, the Fretboard series. Oh, got a question here. How long should you spend practicing one concept before moving on to a new concept? For me, it usually takes 2 to 3 weeks of looking at something kind of regularly for it to be kind of ingested, for lack of a better word. I'd read somewhere a long time ago that, like, to make any learned behavior a habit, to fully internalize something, usually takes 3 weeks worth of constant repetition. And that kind of makes sense. Now, this is music, we're doing different stuff, but that, like, 2-3 weeks, maybe a month, depending on how you take information. And that is, some of it is just how much time do you have to work on this stuff? How do you learn? I used to get really caught up in this thing, like, all the guitar magazines would have the Steve Vai, like, 30-hour practice regimen, and you have to, the legends, of all the jazz players and all the shred guys, oh, you practice 8 or 10 hours a day and you sleep with your guitar and all this stuff. And the reality is in a practical life, most of us can't do that, especially if you've got, like, a real job and you've got a real life and a family and whatever else that you do in your life. We just can't carve out that much time. I do this for a living, and for me, the most efficient way to practice and to work on my forward development is to break up my practice sessions into 30 and 40 minute bits, because I know I can't concentrate any longer than that. I know after about 40 minutes I'm just kind of going in circles, and then I start playing the things wrong, and then I'm practicing and drilling in things the wrong way, and then I'm actually getting further away from what I want to do. So if I break it up, even like 20 or 30 minutes per thing per day, over the course of a couple weeks, will probably get you pretty far. But that practice also is not just, hey, I'm going to run the scale all this time. That idea is also, I'm also going to practice, improvising with it, or I'm going to learn a piece of music that has that scale, like a practice etude. You kind of look at it a couple different ways over the course of what you're doing. You never get anything perfect. I think this is the mistake a lot of people make, is that they think that you have to practice something until you get it down, we'll say, before you move on to the next thing. And if you do that, you're never going to move on to the next thing. None of us really get anything perfect. You get maybe 80% of it. And then, over the next weeks, months, years, the rest of it starts kind of filling in. This is the reality of learning this stuff, especially as an adult. You just don't have the time. Your brain is kind of functioning differently than it was when you were a kid. And this stuff is kind of hard. Even if you had all the time in the world, it would take a long time to internalize. But yeah, I would give yourself a few weeks of working on something specific and in short bites. I always tell the story of the teacher I had. This was not entirely about music, but he said, if you guys want to actually get any value out of this thing that we're doing, which was about ear training, essentially, you do it a little bit every day. If I walked you up to an elephant and said, eat this elephant, and gave you a fork and a knife, physically and realistically, you just can't do that. That's just not going to happen. But if you eat a little bit every day, eventually you'll eat a whole elephant worth of elephant steaks, which is a rather revolting analogy. But, it was the 80s. But that always stuck with me. You have to make things small enough that you can digest. Take in and digest. And if you do that, then these musical or nutrients, we'll say, they'll help you make a strong guitar player out of yourself. If you don't, it's you can practice stuff for a bit and never get anything out of it, or you can practice stuff a lot. If you're not really living in the real world with this stuff, then chances are you're not going to get a whole lot out of that either, right? So you work on things as you can over time. I still come back to stuff, even like real basic things. I was watching this Andy Wood masterclass this morning, like a Zoom thing that he did, that he put somebody put on their YouTube channel, and I love watching him talk about, like, he was talking about these pentatonic ideas, right? And he was doing this repetitive 5-note thing, right? And he was talking about how he works through this stuff, and hearing someone he's the guitar player for Rascal Flatts. He plays in a bunch of other things. He was an incredible mandolin player, bluegrass player, before I ever picked up guitar. And he still talks about things in a real fundamental way sometimes, and he still works on things in a fundamental way. And I think that kind of shows you that this whole thing's a process. You'll never get exactly where you want to go when you want to get there. But if you kind of work on all this stuff and continue working on it, you'll definitely get there. So David says, best way to learn how to implement these scales and develop on-the-fly impromptu solos. Well, so that's kind of what we're talking about. You have to get the stuff under your fingers. You have to have the stuff memorized. It helps, even taking like a backing track. I've become a big fan of, because I've always been like, hey, you need to play with a metronome, which we do. We all need to practice with metronomes. And when you're doing this stuff in the beginning, it's good for technique. If I put my metronome on here, oops, that's not music. All right, just to make sure you've got something correct, let me move this. We'll move you up here. Say I'm doing this G major scale, right? It's important to be able to execute this stuff in time, right? So you do quarter notes, 1 per beat. You do eighth notes, which is 2 notes per beat. Triplets, which is 3. 16th notes if you can. You don't have to do all of these right off the bat, right? But if you can actually play through something consistently in time with the metronome, then when we go to our a backing track and we use the backing track as a metronome. Where's G major here? All right. You know, I tell people, just get used to playing over drums and bass, right? And get used to listening to what these notes sound like over the chord. Right? If you use that as the metronome, after you've done it with the metronome, what happens is that you're building other skills along with still continuing to work on your technique and memorizing the scale pattern. It's a very short jump from that to right, really just using this as a canvas to paint on with these notes. Right? The playing of this stuff is really important. Learning other people's solos is also equally important. Transcribing or playing stuff that's in the scale sound that you want to learn. Major scales are kind of hard because we want to play rock and pop and blues stuff, and there's not a lot of really specific major scale solos in that style. But as you start to collect licks and ideas, even like the blues lick over that, you know, I can say, hey, you know what, this is G. Right, and all the stuff that we were talking about before, about, you know, knowing what these notes are relative to their root. Right, I learned those licks from B.B. King solos. Right, and I know that, hey, that's also going to fit over a major because he's bending up to the major third. There's the 4 and the 5, root 6. So I take that out of the blues context. It's a little hard. Oops, kind of space in here, right? But you know, you can take any idea. Once you've kind of broken it down into what it is and you can identify it, you can move it around the fretboard. But the playing over the backing tracks takes the place of when we were kids and we sat in somebody's garage or in somebody's living room for hours on end and just jammed over 1 or 2 chords. You know, before YouTube and before all this other stuff, you know, jazz, rock, blues, all of that music gets learned in jam sessions, right? Bluegrass, country music. Stuff gets passed from player to player orally. But the experience of having to actually play it along with other people, that's a big part of it. Now, you know, I've been sitting in my garage for almost exactly a year doing this. You guys have all been, you know, kind of doing the same thing. And shifting the focus. The other thing also is that it's life is different now. Yeah, I went to college in the 80s and kind of learned in the traditional sense and had the jam sessions, all the playing experience. I went and played gigs at night and was exposed to a lot of music. And then when I went back to finish my jazz guitar degree just a few years ago, well, I don't have time for that. You know, also socially, you know, I'm 50 years old now. I was 46 when I started, and you know, hanging out with a bunch of 19-year-olds is kind of creepy. You know, and it just doesn't work. You know, it's they're a different generation, and we don't connect on music, and you know, so you have to kind of figure out ways of actually getting to play a lot. And the backing track thing kind of does it to a certain extent. It's not the same as playing with other live people, but you know, if you're in our circumstances where you know you can't hang out in someone's garage, you know, drinking beer till 1 a.m. and you know, playing blues tunes or whatever it is that you would normally do as you're developing as a player, you can sit at home and play with these backing tracks and use them kind of in a similar fashion. You know, get the important stuff out of the way. Getting used to playing over different kinds of rhythm and grooves like we're doing earlier in this live stream. Getting used to taking ideas and using them all over the fretboard or moving them from key to key. You know, getting a YouTube tutorial on how to play a certain song that you really like, and then breaking that down and then, you know, synthesizing it over these backing tracks. All right. This is kind of the thought process I think for contemporary guitar learning, is that we have all of these tools that are sometimes more useful and a lot of times not as useful as what maybe hanging out with a bunch of other players or hanging out with a really good guitar player and learning from them or whatever we used to do. You have all of this stuff that you can do online too. So I think that's kind of one of the key things here to kind of think about, is that you've got these incredible tools at your disposal. You know, part of the reason why my YouTube channel, when I started the new channel, was partially lessons and partially backing tracks, is because, you know, for me, those backing tracks are really useful to work with, and incorporating them into the lessons that we talk about, to me, it just seemed like a no-brainer. But then also, that's, you know, as a YouTuber, as someone who runs a YouTube channel, you know, that's a backing track is a tool. I know this from my own YouTube analytics and watch time. I know, like, these one chord backing tracks that I play over, they get hours and hours and hours of watch time every day, and I'm a small channel, right? But the thing that people are interested in, and I think that what they're using them for, is what I'm talking about, is that this is your opportunity to play with a band, so to speak, even if you don't have access to real people. And what I'm hoping is I'm showing you guys how to use those backing tracks, not as just something to noodle over, but as a framework to learn your skills on. Does that make sense, guys? I just looked up and realized that it's almost time for Terry's lesson. Hey, Brian. Actually, I think you probably did miss a bunch, but it'll be here for you to watch as soon as we're done. You can catch up on the stuff that I did cover. I'll always answer questions. So if you guys have questions and this is not live, go ahead and put them in the video description below, and I will answer those as I see them, or I can address them in future live streams. We do this twice a week. Please, if you like this stuff, subscribe, hit the notification button, like this video, share it with your friends. And also, like, all the links, if they're not there as soon as this is done, they'll be there in the next day or two for all the previous lessons, all the helper lessons, any PDFs that may be useful for this. I'll make sure that they're there and accessible for you. And I guess that's pretty much it. Thanks, guys, for hanging out. Today was kind of fun. It's fun when you guys are here asking questions, so I do appreciate it. Real quick. Here's not... Yeah. So, all right, guys. Thanks a lot. I will see you all maybe on Wednesday. Take care.